Good morning, Rutherford County. This is Justin Davies with the Word of Faith Fellowship. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. I have something to share with you that has been on my heart for probably over a year now. Some things, you know, my wife and I have been walking through with our business and different circumstances. And I think it's very applicable to something that happens to all of us, all the time in different circumstances, relationships, things of that nature. And it has to do with how we respond when people mistreat us, do things that are not right, and how we respond to that. And I have spent a lot of time thinking about this, especially when you walk through things related to your business or related to money or related to things that really affect your life. And I wanted to start off in Isaiah 53, verse 7, because Jesus was the ultimate example of how to respond and how to walk with God in the midst of people mistreating you. And one of the things we're going to find out in this, along when we read these scriptures, is that knowing the truth is the key to walking through any circumstance. And so in Isaiah 53, verse 7, it says, Jesus, this talks about Jesus going through being crucified and being the sacrifice, the ultimate sacrifice for us. Isaiah 53, verse 7, He, Jesus, was afflicted, and he was afflicted and oppressed. He did not open his mouth to complain or defend himself. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that is silent before her shearers, so he did not open his mouth. And right here you see he had truth. He knew he was going to go to the cross. He knew what he was going to suffer. And so walking through whatever mistreatment he was going to walk through, he had the peace of God through all of that. And that's our ultimate example. But there's a lot of scriptures here in throughout the Word of God that really have spoken loud to me. And one of the greatest ones is really in it's about David. And I've really, when you read the book of Psalms and you see David's heart, one of the things that I want in my heart is that I'm like David. That really I have that heart that wants to be right with God. That no matter what I walk through, is where's my heart at? It's not what other people are doing to me. Where's my heart in that circumstance? And as you know, let's just start reading about what David walked through. Obviously, he killed Goliath, and he started becoming a mighty man of valor and fighting battles for Saul. But here's an example of where Saul starts turning against him because he's jealous, and the Spirit of God had left Saul. And 1 Samuel 18, starting in verse 10, Now it came about on the next day that an evil spirit from God came forcefully on Saul, and he raved madly inside his house, while David was playing the harp with his hand, as usual, and there was a spear in Saul's hand. Saul hurled the spear, for he thought, I will pin David to the wall, but David evaded him twice. Now Saul was afraid of David, because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. So Saul had David removed from his presence and appointed him as his commander of 1,000, and he publicly associated with the people. David acted wisely and prospered in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. When Saul saw that he was prosperous greatly, he was afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he publicly associated with the people. I mean, here we see, David is serving Saul. I mean, he's literally doing everything he can to be a servant. And look at the treatment he's getting. And we have to ask ourselves, how would we respond in this scenario? I mean, he tried to kill him. I mean, that's pretty serious. And that's not the only example. You go to chapter 19, go over a page here. Chapter 19, starting in verse 8. Then there was war again, and David went out and fought with the Philistines, and he and defeated them with a great slaughter, and they fled before him. Then an evil spirit from the Lord came on Saul, as he was sitting in his house with his spear in his hand, and David was playing the harp with his hand. Saul tried to pin David to the wall with his spear, but he escaped from Saul's presence, so that Saul only stuck the spear into the wall. Then David fled and escaped that night. So again, here he is serving Saul, faithfully serving Saul, and he's getting this kind of treatment. And you have to ask yourself, how would we respond to this? Would we want to, take the spear out ourselves and try to take this person out? I mean, would that be our response? Like I can't handle this anymore, and I'm ready to get even. I mean, that's the common thing in the world. And but David didn't do that. Let's go on to 1 Samuel 24. Starting in verse 1. When Saul returned from following the Philistines, he was told, "Behold, David is in the wilderness of En-gedi." Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of Israel and went to search for David and his men in front of the rocks of the wild goats. Now, granted, David at this point had already done multiple victories for Saul and for Israel. And here he's got 3,000 men chasing David. On the way, he came to the sheepfolds where there was a cave, and Saul went in to relieve himself. Now David and his men were sitting in the cave's innermost recesses. David's men said to him, "Behold, this is the day of which the Lord said, Behold, I will hand over your enemy to you, and you shall do to him as seems good to you." Then David arose in the darkness and stealthily cut off the hem or the edge of Saul's robe. Afterward, David's conscience bothered him because he had cut off the hem of Saul's robe. Now, this is so key, and because this is where we see David's heart. And I want a heart like this. He said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do this to my master, the Lord's anointed, to put out my hand against him, since he is the anointed of the Lord." So David strongly rebuked his men with these words, and did not let them rise up against Saul. Saul got up, left the cave, and went on his way. Yeah, that's pretty powerful. I mean, here there's a man that's been pursuing David, Saul, and trying to kill him. And David has the opportunity to take him out. But he says, "I will not lift my hand against the Lord's anointed." He let God be the one to take revenge. He didn't take revenge. He let God take care of Saul. And in the end, Saul ends up dying, falling on a sword in battle with the Philistines. And it's just so powerful, the heart of David. I mean, this is something that I've had to go back and read a lot myself. Like, would I be able to do this? Do I have this heart that when people mistreat me, that I let God take care of them, but at the end of the day, my heart is going to stay right with God? I'm going to keep my heart right. And here's the thing, too. You might have somebody in your life that was a very influential person. It could have been a pastor. Could have been a teacher. Could have been somebody you really trust. And then they do something that hurts you. How would you respond? I mean, David said, "I'm not going to lift my hand against the Lord's anointed." He knew if he lifted his hands against the Lord's anointed, the judgment of God was going to come down on David. And so later on, so Saul wakes up, and in verse 8 it says, "Then David also got up afterward and went out of the cave and called after Saul, saying, 'My lord the king.' And when Saul looked behind him, David bowed his face to the ground and lay himself face down." And this is just amazing to me. "And David said to Saul, 'Why do you listen to the words of men who say, David seeks to harm you? Behold, your eyes have seen today how the Lord had given you into my hand in the cave. Some told me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not reach out my hand against my Lord, for he's the Lord's anointed. And look, my father, indeed, see the hem of your robe in my hand. Since I cut off the hem of your robe and did not kill you, know and understand without question that there is no evil or treason in my hands. I have not sinned against you, though you are lying in wait to take my life. May the Lord judge between me and you, and may the Lord avenge me on you, but my hand shall not be against you. As the proverb of the ancients says, out of wicked comes wickedness, but my hand shall not be against you. After whom has the king of Israel come out? Whom do you pursue with 3,000 men? A dead dog, a single flea? May the Lord be the judge, and render judgment between me and you, and may he see and plead my cause, and vindicate me by saving me from your hand. When David had finished saying these words, to Saul, Saul said, "Is this your voice, my son David?" Then Saul raised his voice and wept. He said to David, "You are more righteous and upright in God's eyes than I, for you have done good to me, but I have done evil to you. You've declared today the good that you have done to me, for when the Lord put me into your hand, you did not kill me. For if a man finds his enemy, will he let him go away unharmed? So may the Lord reward you with good in return for what you have done for me this day. Now behold, I know that you will certainly be king, and that the kingdom of Israel be established in your hand. So now swear to me by the Lord that you will not cut off my descendants after me, and that you will not destroy my name from my father's household, extended family." David gave Saul his oath, and Saul went home, but David and his men went up to the mountain of stronghold. And if you read on, you'll actually see that David, when he was king, said, "What can I do to show kindness? What other descendants are still left of Saul's household that I can show kindness to them?" And that was David's heart. And the reason I keep going back to David's heart is because that's what God's looking at. Where is our heart? And I had an example. My wife and I, we have a business here in the county, and we had a little over a year ago. We were doing a project, and some people from outside our company were involved in the project, and they started doing things that were not right. And quite frankly, after seeking some legal counsel, they were legally violating some rights of ours. And it wasn't right what they were doing. But God came to me with some of these scriptures and says, "So where's your heart going to be? Are you going to seek revenge on these people?" I mean, these people were doing was really hindering our business. Really, making it tough for us to do business. And God took me to some of these scriptures and said, "So where's your heart? Do you have a heart of love for these people?" I mean, our pastors have taught us that. I mean, all the persecution that we've had, the heart of our pastors, Sam and Jane Whaley, has been, let God deal with those people, but our hearts are going to stay right. No matter what happens, our heart's going to stay right. Because at the end of the day, we have to look at our own heart. One of the things, though, that anchored me in walking through that situation is knowing truth. So when this particular situation happened, I actually was a little, shook up from it. And someone told me, you need to know what the law is. You need to know what truth is. What are your rights? Get truth. And so I started researching, seeking legal counsel, getting advice from, attorneys. And I started finding out that our legal rights were being violated. And that gave me truth. But God, one of the things the Lord spoke to me through all this was, just because people are doing things wrong, and maybe it's not, God, so to speak, for you to take out the sword and fight them, or sue them or whatever it is, you can still know the truth and stand on the truth, but you also can still be humble. You also still can treat people the way Jesus treated people. When he went to the cross, he said, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they do." And that comes from a heart of understanding that God's forgiven us. I think all of us, if we look within ourselves, would see places where we've been difficult from time to time. Maybe we've mistreated others, and God's forgiven us. So why shouldn't we return that? But knowing truth is the basis for walking through these situations, because when you know the truth, it anchors you. And when you also have your heart right, and that's the focal point of everything, is my heart right? Is my attitude right through the situation? Then you can walk through it in the grace of God, and you come out on the other side. And some of these people that mistreated my wife and I, to this day, I'm actually good friends with them, and we get along. And that's what we've been taught. That's what we've been taught. But that's what the Bible teaches. There's a lot of other examples. I hope we get to all of them. I think one of the things that was so powerful, if you go to Acts chapter 7, Stephen was preaching, and starting in verse 54, he's preaching, and he's really, talking to the people about Jesus, and then he starts going into, now when they heard this, and he was talking about how the children of Israel were stiff-necked, and he started, hitting their stubbornness. Now when they heard this accusation, understood its implication, they were cut to the heart, and they began grinding their teeth in rage at him. But he, Stephen, being full of the Holy Spirit and led by him, gazed into heaven and saw the glory, the great splendor and majesty of God, and Jesus standing at the right hand of God. And he said, "Look, I see the heavens opened up in welcome, and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God." But they shouted with voices and covered their ears, and together rushed at him, considering him guilty of blasphemy. Then they drove him out of the city and began stoning him, and the witnesses placed their outer robes at the feet of a young man named Saul. Later on, that Saul is Paul. And they continued stoning Stephen as he called out on the Lord and said, "Lord Jesus, receive and accept and welcome my spirit." Then falling on his knees in worship, he cried out loudly, "Lord, do not hold this sin against them. Do not charge them." When he had said this, he fell asleep in death. What powerful words coming from a man that's being stoned. And he's saying, "Lord, like Jesus, forgive them. They don't know what they do." Such powerful words while he's getting ready to take his last breaths. And what's amazing here is if you go on to Acts 22, and again, Stephen knew truth. Before I go on, Stephen knew truth. He knew it was time for him to go be with Jesus. And he knew that he must glorify Jesus in his death by showing the ultimate love and praying for these people. Because perhaps one day, one or more of these people could turn their heart to Jesus. So if you go to Acts 22, this is Paul, who was Saul, standing there guarding the coats of those that were stoning Stephen. And this is what was really interesting, because this is going to be an account where Paul goes through something similar. He didn't die, but something similar. Acts 22, verse 22, they listened to Paul until he made this last statement. But now they raised their voices and shouted, "Away with such a man from the earth. He's not fit to live." And as they were shouting and throwing off their coats, getting ready to stone Paul and tossing dust into the air, expressing their anger, the commander ordered him to be brought into the barracks, stating that he was to be interrogated with a whip in order to learn why people were shouting against him that way. Now, if you look at the footnote, the reason he was going to be interrogated with a whip is back at that time, one of the ways to get slaves or different people to come and basically admit the truth was to be pretty much tortured. And so that was basically what they were going to do. Well, let's torture this guy and see if we can get really the truth of what he's really done. But when they stretched him out with the leather straps in preparation for the whip, Paul said to the centurion who was standing by, "Is it legal for you to whip a man who is a Roman citizen and uncondemned without a trial?" When the centurion heard this, he went to the commander and said to him, "What are you about to do? This man's a Roman." So the commander came and asked Paul, "Tell me, are you a Roman?" He said, "Yes." The commander replied, "I purchased this citizenship of mine for a large sum of money. So how did you acquire yours?" Paul said, "I was actually born a citizen." So here we see that Paul actually, he had the truth. He knew he was doing the will of God, but he also knew he was a Roman citizen. He knew what his rights were. And that goes back to my experience. I started understanding what my rights were. I started getting the truth. And that helped me stand. And that helped Paul stand. And as soon as they found out he was a Roman, it says in verse 29, so those who were about to interrogate him by torture immediately let him go. And the commander was also afraid when he realized that Paul was a Roman, and he had him put in chains. So now all of a sudden they're scared because here they've done something. They violated his rights. And but that helped Paul stand. And that's so key. There's a lot of other scriptures here. There are some examples, though, where people didn't have the truth. And when mistreatment came, or supposed mistreatment came, they responded out of whatever was in them at that time. And in John, let's go to John 18. This is the account of where Jesus is getting ready to go be crucified. And again, he had told his disciples, I'm going to be crucified. It's God's plan that I go to the cross. This is what's going to happen to me. I'm going to suffer. I'm going to be crucified, and I'm going to be rose from the dead in 3 days. If Peter had that in his heart, this wouldn't have happened. So in John 18, starting in verse 3. So Judas, having obtained the Roman cohort and some officers from the high priest and the Pharisees, came there with lanterns and torches and weapons. Then Jesus, knowing all that was about to happen to him, went to them and asked, Whom do you want? They said, Jesus, the Nazarene. Jesus said, I am he. And Judas, who was betraying him, was also standing with them. So Jesus knew what was getting ready to happen. His heart was prepared. He had just prayed in the garden. Peter's heart wasn't ready. Because if you skip down to verse 10, it says, Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Peter didn't have truth in his heart. He reacted out of the flesh. And many times I've done that. And I'm learning to do more of saying, Jesus, what's truth? How do I walk through this? How do I walk in love? What should I do, Jesus? Because later on, for me, I in this example, this project where I was mistreated, I didn't know that God was preparing me for another trial where we sold a large sum of product to a customer, and this customer decided to dispute the charge on the credit card and keep the merchandise to the over $20,000. And I'm walking through that right now, and I've actually had a chance to confront this individual in person and talk to this person, face to face. And God's saying, do you have love in your heart for this person? Do you have compassion for this person? Are you going to walk with me in this situation? Or are you going to get in the flesh and try to do it and try to basically seek revenge? And Jesus never, throughout the scriptures, Jesus never told the saints, told his disciples to seek revenge. Obey me, hear my voice, do what I say. And sometimes, God will bring the judgment on people for mistreating his people. But we let God do it. We don't seek it ourselves out of the flesh because we end up making a mess. And I think all of us have examples where we've sought revenge. We've sought to get even, and we've made a mess. And I want to learn to hear God's voice, submit, let the love of God come in my heart for this person, let compassion come in my heart for these people, but let God take care of the situation. Let's see here. Here's another example about Moses. Moses, was leading God's people out of Egypt, and he didn't have it easy, and quite frankly, you put yourself in his shoes. He dealt with some people that were complaining all the time. It wasn't ever good enough. It just didn't seem, in the natural, sometimes it seemed like, what's the use? And unfortunately, he got to that point, and it cost him. Numbers 20, starting in verse 8, they've been through Egypt, been through the plagues, the water split open for the Red Sea. They'd gone through all this, but the children of Israel, different points, just stiff-necked, hard-hearted. That's what God called them, stiff-necked. And Moses, up to this point, has faithfully executed what God told him. But then in Numbers 20, starting verse 8, God said, Take the rod, you and your brother Aaron, assemble the congregation and speak to the rock in front of them, so that it will pour out its water. In this way you shall bring water for them out of the rock, and let the congregation and their livestock drink fresh water. So Moses took the rod from before the Lord, just as he had commanded him. So he took the rod, and Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly before the rock, and Moses said to them, Listen now, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock? Then Moses raised his hand in anger, and with his rod he struck the rock twice, instead of speaking to the rock as the Lord had commanded. And water poured out abundantly, and the congregation and their livestock drank fresh water. Now the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you have not believed and trusted me to treat me as holy in the sight of the sons of Israel, you therefore shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them. Very sad. Here Moses had gone through all of this, and he gets this one point, and he let their sin affect him. And I think all of us, if we're, honest with ourselves, have done the same thing. We've let what other people do, mistreatment, whatever it is, we've let that affect us. We've let that get us to get frustrated and angry and put out and lose sight of Jesus, and letting Jesus show us how to walk through, whatever situation, we're going through. I see that I'm running out of time here, and there's so many other scriptures. If we go to, Daniel 6, Daniel had his heart in the right place. Daniel determined in his heart not to defile himself. The satraps and the deputies, they found no fault in him. The only thing they could find was that he worshiped God. So what do? They create a conspiracy to try to make it a crime to pray to any god except the king. And Daniel knew what was going on, still went and prayed, and they all came thronging by agreement to find him praying to God. And he's thrown into the den of lions. We all know most of us know the story. But Daniel had the truth, because when God delivered Daniel out of the den of lions, he told the king, I've done no wrong. Daniel knew he had done nothing wrong. He knew he was in the will of God. He knew that God was going to take care of him. And he just had peace. And quite frankly, I look at my life and circumstances I've had in my life, and, I've lost sight of God. I've lost sight of what God wanted to do. I lost sight of, I had more of my sight on the circumstances and what someone did that was wrong, instead of my sights being on God. How do I walk through this, and what are you trying to teach me? The circumstances and the situations I shared with you this morning, God taught me things through it. God developed me. God changed my heart. God taught me love. God taught, and is continuing to teach me compassion and sympathy and empathy for other people, that are mistreating me. Quite frankly, most people mistreat others because they're hurt themselves. They've gone through circumstances in their life themselves, and the only thing they know how to do is inflict that pain into other people. And it takes someone with God's love to see through all that and say, God, how do you want me to walk through this, where maybe one day, like Stephen, my love and my compassion will reach into the heart of someone hard like Saul, and potentially sow the seed in someone's life to turn their heart to Jesus. And that's what us Christians are called to do. That's what we're called to do. That is the love is the ultimate, is the centerpiece of our faith, because that's what God gives us. And God requires us to walk in that love. And again, I want to go back on one other point, knowing truth. We have to know truth, and we have to know that we are walking with God, that we have to know that our heart is right. And that's the key too. Is our heart right? Is our attitude right? Do we have love in our heart for that person? I haven't always had that. You can ask yourself, have I had love in my heart for those people? Do I really care for them? Do I really, want their best welfare? If I was given an opportunity to seek revenge and to take revenge, would I take it? Look back at David. He didn't do that. He let God take care of him. So with that, I enjoyed being with you this morning. I enjoyed sharing my heart and the experiences I've had and what God is showing me. Visit our website, www.wordoffaithfellowship.org. We're here Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 8:30 to 9 a.m. And I hope you have a blessed day.